Hi readers, great to be with you again. I've been looking at all the work that you've been sending me, and I have to tell you it is looking awesome. I can tell by the jots in your graphic organizers and your notebooks that you are reading deeply and analyzing those characters in your books at a really high level. So keep up that good work and keep up that daily reading. Today I'm going to be reading aloud to you the end of the story, The Scholarship Jacket. If you missed my last video where I read the beginning of the story, please go back and check that one out first because you definitely don't want to spoil the end before you've heard the beginning. So, we are today going to talk about power, one of my favorite things to talk about when it comes to literature and life. So, when we're thinking about power today, we're just going to do a very basic analysis of who in this story has power and how does that shift or not shift throughout the story. So before we get started with the reading, I want to give you an example of what we're talking about. So you are going to need your notebook or the graphic organizer. They are linked below. If you would like to read along with the story, you can also grab your copy of the story, and you're going to need something to write with, a pen or pencil, so that you can take notes during this lesson. I will pause here so that you can scurry off and grab that stuff and meet me right back here. Now that you have everything that you need, let's get started. I want to start by talking about that power pyramid. Think back to your social studies class from earlier in the school year. Think back to when we read Homeless Bird as a class novel. Can you remember the power pyramid? Check this out. So, when we read Homeless Bird, we analyzed the power in that book. We noticed that Coley was pretty consistently down here at the bottom of the power pyramid. She had less power than many of the other characters. Sass was consistently up at the top of the power pyramid until the very end of the story. The other characters, Hari, Sasur, and Chandra, kind of moved around a little bit depending on what people did and honestly when people died. But this is sort of like what we're going to be doing today in the Scholarship Jacket, okay? So let's talk about what we mean by power, just as a review. Power is the ability to influence what happens in a story. So a character who has a lot of power might be someone who has a lot of influence on the events of the story, or who makes a lot of decisions for other characters. A character who doesn't have very much power might seem like things just sort of happen to them, or that they just don't have very much control over their lives. This is true in all kinds of stories, whether it's a book or a movie or a TV show. You can apply this idea of power to all of those movies and TV shows that you've been watching now that you're out of school. You can also apply this in real life, to your own life, your own family. We'll do a little bit of reflecting on that after the end of the read aloud, okay? So speaking of the read aloud, let's think about what we remember from the story from the last video. The Scholarship Jacket is about a 14-year-old girl named Marta. She has straight A's and she's hoping to win this special prize that her school gives to the student with the highest grades at the end of 8th grade. One day, she overhears two of her teachers talking about who should get the scholarship jacket. And she finds out that even though she has the highest grades, there's another girl named Joanne who has a very well-connected father who they're considering giving it to because of who Joanne's father is and because Marta is Mexican. She is devastated. Her principal tells her that the scholarship jacket now is going to cost $15. So she runs home and asks her grandfather if she could have the $15, and he refuses. And Marta is crushed. So thinking about what we know about the story so far and the power dynamic, what I want you to do is on your graphic organizer or in your notebook, I want you to make your own power pyramid kind of like this. So the people with the most power are going to go up here at the top, and the characters with the least power are going to go down here at the bottom. And I would like you to fill in the characters on the power pyramid where you think they go, like fill in Marta, fill in the adults, the teachers, her grandfather, and let's just throw Joanne and her family in there just for fun. Okay, I'm going to give you a moment to work on this in your notebook, and I'm going to work on it on my paper here, and then when we rejoin each other, we'll compare what we came up with. Okay, did you get everybody placed on your power pyramid? Don't keep watching until you've actually written down those names. It is okay if your power pyramid doesn't quite look like mine. There's no one right answer to this. I just want you thinking and trying this, okay? So I'm gonna show you mine in a minute. Here's what I was thinking. So thinking about who is influencing what's happening in this story, so far it seems like Marta is kind of just going along and things are sort of happening to her. So I took that into mind when I made my power pyramid. I also thought about who's making the decision about who gets to give away the scholarship jacket, right? Who gets to choose who gets it? And what are the factors that are being considered when they're thinking about who gets the scholarship jacket? Like, why are they thinking about giving it to Joanne and her family? So here's mine. So did you put Marta down at the bottom like I did? It doesn't mean that she's powerless. It just seems like she's not making decisions in the same way that everybody else in the story maybe is, right? Up at the top here, I put the principal and the teachers because they are the ones who seem like they have all the power to decide who gets the jacket, and they don't seem to be treating Marta with respect, and they also don't seem to really care about that. Like, one little detail that I noticed was that they don't even call her by her proper name. If you've been reading along on the text or listening super carefully, you might have noticed that they call her Martha, but her name is Marta. And it just makes me think that they're not really showing her respect by pronouncing her name in the way that it should be pronounced. So they are up here at the top because it seems like they get to do whatever they want. I put Joanne and her family next because her father owns a business in town and they want to give her the scholarship jacket just because her father is well connected. And then I put Grandpa here below Joanne and her family, but above Marta, because it seemed like the grandpa got to decide whether Marta got the $15 or not. But he's below Joanne and her family because it's clear that the teachers and principal think that Joanne's family is like more valuable than Marta's family, which seems like it's definitely not true, but that seems to be what people in the story think. Does yours look like mine? If not, no worries. You don't need to change it. All I care about is that you're thinking about it. So your job is, as we read today, to hold on to that idea of power and who has it and who doesn't, but also to begin considering how power begins to shift and change throughout the story. That's the thing about power. It doesn't stay the same. It's always shifting and changing from moment to moment. If you're following along on the text, we are on the 4th page, up near the top of the page, just after those were the days of belief and innocence. It was a very sad and withdrawn girl who dragged into the principal's office the next day. This time, he did look me in the eyes. "What did your grandfather say?" I sat very straight in my chair. "He said to tell you he won't pay the $15. The principal muttered something I couldn't understand under his breath and walked over to the window. He stood looking out at something outside. He looked bigger than usual when he stood up. He was a tall, gaunt man with gray hair, and I watched the back of his head while I waited for him to speak. "Why?" he finally asked. "Your grandfather has the money. He owns a 200-acre ranch." I looked at him, forcing my eyes to stay dry. "I know, sir, but he said if I had to pay for it, then it wouldn't be a scholarship jacket." I stood up to leave. "I guess you'll just have to give it to Joanne." I hadn't meant to say that. It just slipped out. I was almost to the door when he stopped me. "Martha, wait." I turned and looked at him, waiting. What did he want now? I could feel my heart pounding loudly in my chest and see my blouse fluttering where my breast should have been. Something bitter and vile tasting was coming up in my mouth. I was afraid I was going to be sick. I didn't need any sympathy speeches. He sighed loudly and went back to his big desk. He watched me, biting his lip. Okay, we'll make an exception in your case. I'll tell the board you'll get the jacket. I could hardly believe my ears. I spoke in a trembling rush. Oh, thank you, sir. Suddenly, I felt great. I didn't know about adrenaline in those days, but I knew something was pumping through me. It made me feel as tall as the sky. I wanted to yell, jump, run the mile, do something. I ran out so I could cry in the hall where there was no one to see me. At the end of the day, Mr. Schmidt winked at me and said, I hear you're getting the scholarship jacket this year. His face looked as happy and innocent as a baby's, but I knew better. Without answering, I gave him a quick hug and ran to the bus. I cried on the walk home again, but this time because I was so happy. I couldn't wait to tell Grandpa and ran straight to the field. I joined him in the row where he was working, and without saying anything, I crouched down and started pulling up the weeds with my hands. Grandpa worked alongside me for a few minutes, and he didn't ask what had happened. After I had a little pile of weeds between the rows, I stood up and faced him. The principal said he's making an exception for me, Grandpa, and I'm getting the jacket after all. That's after I told him what you said. Grandpa didn't say anything. He just gave me a pat on the shoulder and a smile. He pulled out the crumpled red handkerchief that he always carried in his back pocket and wiped the sweat off his forehead. Better go see if your grandmother needs any help with supper. I gave him a big grin. He didn't fool me. I skipped and ran back to the house, whistling some silly tune. The end. So, readers, going back to our power pyramid here. In the beginning and middle of the story, we noticed that Marta and her grandpa were below many of the other characters. But if we're thinking about power as the ability to influence what happens in a story, is this power pyramid still accurate? Has the power shifted or changed in any way throughout the story? Will you take a moment and see if you can revise your power pyramid in any way that it needs to be revised? I'm going to do the same, and then we'll come back together and compare what we came up with. Did you make any changes to the order of characters on your power pyramid? I did. Here's what I came up with. Compare yours to mine. So I decided that Grandpa and Marta should be up higher on the power pyramid now, because by standing up to the principal and the teachers, by refusing to pay those $15, by Marta being brave in the principal's office, it seems that they ended up influencing what happened in the story. Marta won it without having to pay the $15 that was so unfair and racist to begin with. Did your pyramid end up looking kind of like mine? Well, either way, there's not any necessarily right or wrong answer to this. I just wanted to get you thinking about this issue of power. So in your independent reading book today, your assignment is to think about the power pyramid in your book. I want you to draw one and order those characters. And as you read over the next couple of days, I want you to see if you need to make any revisions and shift and change who has what kind of power in the book, because it should be shifting and changing depending on the scene and what happens in the story. Okay. If you're using the graphic organizer, there's a little bit of information at the end for a reflection for you to do to think about the power in your own life and how that shifts and changes within your own social circle and your own family. Happy reading!